the most obvious challenge to universality, the universality factor really, comes from, you will agree with me, cultural relativism, which maintains that universal human rights are neo-imperialistic. It comes from a new imperialism and culturally hegemonic because it's a powerful platform and a powerful group that has a lot of power over us. So while this perspective may be tempting, look at it from that point of view, may be pretty tempting. The relativist argument encompasses a debilitating self-contradiction. Really, it destroys us. There's a contradiction that destroys that argument. Now, why does it do that? It does that by postulating that the only sources of moral validity are individual cultures themselves. One is precluded from making any consistent moral judgments as a result. There's some truth in that, of course. Further, the cultural relativist, in fact, makes a universalist judgment in giving us the argument that tolerance, in between inverted commas, tolerance is the ultimate good to be respected by all. Now, I'm sure we will all agree that there's a lot of truth in that. Because if we are tolerant of each other, we will be respectful of each other. So therefore, my dear friends, it is a naturally self-refuting theory that engages universalism in its own rejection of that concept. Now, in a practical sense, the cultural relativist position is foundationally, I would say, incompatible with human rights. Now, that theory, really, quite frankly, is incompatible with human rights. Because we can't have different rights in different places across the world. We have to have perhaps if I describe it as a gold standard. So it's, as I said, foundationally incompatible with human rights, as human rights themselves could not exist if they were stripped of common moral judgment. So there must be a common moral judgment, whether we are doing it in India, in Sri Lanka, in South America, or perhaps in China. So, and yet, the question, I say, remains. And what is that question that remains? That even if human rights must be universal in order to remain coherent, in order to remain clear, what should we do when faced with practices or cultures with which our version of human rights clashes? In other words, what do we do when the Sri Lankan version of human rights, the Indian version of human rights, the Chinese version of human rights, and the American version of human rights clashes? What do we do? Now, the question is interesting. Should we stand idle? I'm just asking. Whatever the human rights ethos that we have in our own countries, right? I'm asking the question, should we stand idle when atrocities are committed, wherever they are committed? The answer, you will agree with me, is surely not. While universal human rights should not be geographically or culturally flexible so as to undercut their entire purpose, in my view, we must see the continuum of rights and culture as rational and not exclusive. It must be a rational continuum of rights. It can't be culturally flexible. In other words, Pakistan can't have a separate set of rights. The Chinese can't have a separate set of rights. And we can't have a separate set of rights. So, by definition, then, my dear friends, human rights, we know, are inalienable. They can't be taken away from us. Because we are born with those rights. So this involves the inability of something to be taken away or given away by the possessor. So in other words, it can't be taken away from us, neither can we give it up. So you will appreciate that while the 1776 United States Declaration of Independence or the 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Man and the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights repeatedly affirmed that rights were inalienable, it remains today that very few can agree on the meaning of this. So we say it's inalienable, we are proud to say it, but very few can agree on the real meaning when we say human rights are inalienable. My dear friends, I was doing a little bit of research on this matter, and I found that early philosophers and scholars such as John Locke, Mason, Lilburn spoke of natural rights in terms of inherentness, in terms of natality, and the inability to be surrendered, helping later thinkers better conceptualize the core of inalienability by asking the question, very interestingly, who the human is in human rights. Ask yourself that question. Who is the human in human rights? So, my dear friends, given today's challenges of displacement and statelessness, we have it here, we have it there. It therefore seems more helpful to eschew an abstract reasoning, to try and take out an abstract reasoning surrounding inalienability and acknowledge that rights are inseparable from statehood and citizenship in the international human rights system. What rights, I ask? Very simply put, I'm asking the question, what rights can we have if it is separated from statehood? What rights can we really enjoy if it's separated from citizenship? Just ask yourself the question. As Arendt reasoned, he says, inalienability, in a quote, he says, inalienability has turned out to be unenforceable. In other words, he's having virtually a laugh at all of us and saying, what kind of nonsense are you chaps talking about? Inalienability, he says, is unenforceable. You think about it, we are not far from the truth, isn't it? Now let me turn to indivisibility. Turning to indivisibility, this principle maintains that the implementation of all rights at the same time, simultaneously, is necessary for the full functioning or the full blossoming of the human rights system. Now, it's a call, as someone else put it, beyond Dhamma. Now, King Asoka, in his rock edicts and pillar inscriptions, propagated the true essence of Dhamma. The good King Asoka asked the different religious groups, if you remember, if you go to Kathak, you probably will see those inscriptions. I have been there and I've seen it. The different religious groups, he asked the different religious groups, the Brahmins, the Buddhists, the Jains, to live in peace. That's all he asked. Now, his lofty ideals also included shunning violence and war, stopping animal sacrifice, respect for elders, respect of slaves by their masters, vegetarianism, and a host of good things. Above all, King Ashoka the Great wanted peace in his empire. What a dream. King Ashoka believed, let me dwell on Ashoka just a minute or two more. King Ashoka believed that the king should look upon his subjects as a father treats his children. the concept of paternalism, and that's what the state is doing with us these days. A paternalistic role, telling us wash your hands, telling us wear a mask, telling us stay at home. So there you are. King Asoka believed that the king should look upon his subjects as a father treats his children, paternalism. He took care of his subjects in various ways and was responsible for carrying out a lot of welfare activities during his reign, like building of roads, planting of trees along these roads, what you see in India today. Wells, rest houses for travelers, hospitals for the sick, and so on and so forth. Then we had those officials called the Dhamma Mahatmas, the officers responsible for promoting the policy of Dhamma, who looked after these welfare activities across the empire. Ashoka had a friendly relation with his neighbors and sent and received envoys to and from them. The empire then was a far cry from what we see today, unfortunately. My dear friends, many United Nations documents have this to say about governance. Since it insists on participation, it insists for respect to the rule of law. It insists for the need for transparency. It insists for the requirement for being responsible, for governance to have the capacity to reach a broad consensus for the lost interests of society. It is calling as a cry to ensure equity and inclusiveness to be effective and efficient. And finally, it is crying for accountability. Now that's a very interesting word, particularly for us judges who don't quite believe in this whole concept of accountability because we don't see it as the other side of the coin of independence. Isn't it time to think about it? My dear friends, John Locke argued in detail, mainly in writings associated with the revolution of 1888, the glorious revolution that certain rights self-evidently pertain to individuals as human beings, because they existed then in the state of nature, before humankind entered civil society. That chief among them are the right to life, the right to liberty, freedom from arbitrary rule, and property, that upon entering civil society, pursuant to our social contract, we have given up our natural rights for civil rights. And that social contract is what we are talking of, where humankind surrendered to the state only the right to enforce those natural rights, not the rights themselves. Now, that's an important distinction to appreciate. And that the state's failure to secure these reserved natural rights, the state being under a contract to safeguard the interests of its members, gives right to responsible popular revolution. My dear friends, insistence that men are born and remain free and equal in rights, and that the aim of every political association is the preservation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man. Now that's something extremely important. And that was the result of the liberal thinkers of the 19th century. My dear friends, the rights flowing from this freedom are identified. What are they identified as? We have it in our constitutions: liberty, prosperity, safety, and the resistance to oppression. And defines liberty so as to include the right to free speech, freedom of association, religious freedom, the freedom from arbitrary arrest, the freedom from wrong confinement, almost as if anticipating the Bill of Rights. Think about it. It didn't fall from heaven. There is a source to it. It comes from natural rights. In a context, therefore, where escalating rhetorical support, I say, for human rights as a cause célèbre, as a cause, interesting point for the public to get excited about, coexists with systematic abuse of many of these rights. Is it then, I ask you, surprising that the very meaning of human rights has become contested today? It has become questionable. It's a lovely topic to be talking about. So, radically different definitions and interpretations of human rights have been therefore proposed as a result. Each one of those definitions, if you look at, claims the banner of human rights in the name of human rights. That is the irony of this world. So, my dear friends, on the one hand, the phrase universal human rights is used to assert the universal norms or standards regarded as applicable to all human societies. Now, this assertion has its roots in the ancient ideas of universal justice and medieval notions of natural law. Now, on the other hand, the idea of human rights is used to affirm that all individuals solely by virtue of being human have moral rights which no society, which no state or state should deny. There's no question of alienating that right. So therefore you will see that a major characterization of natural rights, which derived from that belief, is that rights, within quotes, rights, are the properties of persons capable of exercising a rational choice. That's why it's human, because we are the only ones who have a faculty to rationalize anything. So therefore, rights are the properties of persons capable of exercising rational choice. You know, no animal can have that choice because they don't have a rationale that makes them capable of exercising choices. They act by instinct. That's the difference. Hence, the adoption of the autonomous individual from arbitrary incursion by the state of other coercive association. So that's why we adopt the autonomous individual from arbitrary incursion by the state, protecting us from other coercive associations. So, my dear friends, what am I saying? I'm saying that the listing of the right to life, for example, did not involve a commitment to the extension or the universalization of healthcare, or to actions for shaping a safer environment, but to a rule of law that would restrain arbitrary acts of violence, especially those of governmental authorities against individuals. Similarly, the natural right to liberty, if you look at that, did not refer to support of policies that would enhance self-realization through the universalization of education. But it did require the legal protection of individuals against arbitrary imprisonment. That's what it did. So therefore, since the natural rights of men were bound so intrinsically to their capacity to exercise rational choice as free, autonomous beings, the list of natural rights comprised what have been termed as negative freedoms, rather than positive liberty. That is, the freedom that protects the individuals from the invasion of his domain of selfhood or privacy, rather than the freedom of the individual or group to achieve its purposes or ideals. So they blessed us with negative rights. Now, this stress is important, my dear friends, and is evident in the many detailed lists of the declaration of bills or rights that has sprung up, proliferated, so to speak, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Now, you will agree that the inclusion of a number of human rights that relate to social and economic development is a notable difference between the classic theory of natural rights and the theory that led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, here arises, in my view, and if you read the books, you will see that even the academics actually identify, here arises an interesting debate. And it may be something that you can ponder after I speak. It does appear common sense, not to mention attractive, to argue that the important content of all identified and recognized human rights found in international convention documents are of uniform application to every human being on the human being on this planet. Interesting thing is that all of them say just one thing in common. Whether such human beings are in the desert of Nevada or the isopolar regions of Greenland or in Sri Lanka or perhaps in India, it speaks a common language. Yet, you will appreciate that the problem is whether the gamut of considerations which underlie, which underpin the operationalization of the several rights of humanity are the same in all settings. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Right? That the problem is whether the gamut of all those considerations that underlie, whether they are the operationalization of the several rights of humanity are the same in all